So that is my hi everybody. By the way, that is my subject board for when I'm doing posts because I have the most scattered memory. It keeps me kind of on subject a little bit. As if you've seen my earlier posts, you could definitely see how I um, jump from subject to subject and then I forget where I was and I was beginning to make a point and then I didn't make the point and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's frustrating for you. It is really frustrating for me because of all the people that should be able to, you know, I mean, it's just a normal conversation thing. Of all the people you'd think be able to control that would be the person, that brought the subject up and that's having kind of a conversation that's one way, you know. It's even worse. Of course, it is even worse when because I have ADHD. It was never officially diagnosed until my 50s, but at my request, somebody took a look and asked some questions along with dyscalculia. But who knows where all that comes from? Um, but when I'm talking to somebody, I mean, it's bad enough when it's a one-sided conversation where that I'm having a conversation basically with you guys, and I'm it's sort of I'm just telling. So I'm not telling jokes. I'm not being funny. I don't have anything scripted, and stuff. I'm just talking about life or whatever, or work or who knows, cats. But as easily as I get distracted, even with a one-sided conversation, imagine what it'd be like talking to somebody. And that is at least something that when I started having what I considered interesting conversations, I didn't remember when I was really young, when I was having, conversation with my dad and stuff like that, prior to the time that I was like, say, 13, 14. Because by the time a kid turns 13 or 14, they become a jackass, I mean, male, female doesn't matter. I mean, and some of them are a lot worse than others that way. Some of them just seem evil. But kids, they prioritize all the worst shit. They don't care about anything normal or interesting. They care about the dumbest things. And I took two kids one time with me. One of my girlfriends, a son of hers, and a teenage son of hers, and a his cousin. And I took them on a cross country trip because I had to go see my mom. I was on the West Coast, and I had to go see my mom to do some work for her house on her house. And it's 2,000 mile trip each way, and so it was summertime, and the kids wanted to go, and so I asked their mom, and she was cool with it because the boy needed some extra supervision. In fact, when she and I got together, we were coworkers. I was a supervisor at her job, and that she I was supervising a particular job site, and she worked for the company also, and then came over to our job site, and that's how we met. And so we spent time talking and stuff like that, and her son just so happened at that when we started talking um, was had just been, I guess, I don't know, arrested or something like that, and was involved in the court system in the next town over. And the judge that they were going to go to in the next couple of days, I knew, and I was involved in an outreach program for at-risk youth, and it just so happened that it was I mean, I guess it was meant to be, but it was just exactly what I'd been doing for a while as a, like a side thing. Not money or anything like that, just as a, some people do the big brother thing and some people, you know, try to intervene in teenagers being themselves when they get farther along than they should have been. And part of it was his dad had been a construction guy, had his own business, really successful. Then he got into meth, and which is so funny because his daughter, which was this kid's sister, uh, basically tricked him into getting into meth. He was really tired, working all the time. Contractors, when they're good at the contracting, but they're not good at the business side of it, it runs them to death. And he had a family to support, which is the difference between me and him that way was I was doing my own thing, but I never had, people to really support. Everybody I've ever been with has also been a worker, and stuff like my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad made all kinds of money, but now that was my dad was really old school and kind of misogynistic and stuff like that, really badly. He was Southern, old school Southern. He was born in 1938. So he didn't want my mom to have a job. He felt it was like some kind of personal insult. He was a good man. Don't get me wrong. He was a kind person. He was a conscientious person. He was as anti-racist as you can be for his time, really, in my opinion, and still be not considered a radical. Um, he raised his kids that way. I don't know exactly what the other kids got, in my family that way, but I mean, he was constantly doing things with me, uh, specifically to teach me about racism and that black people, was his focus because he was from Tupelo, Mississippi, and teaching me that black people were just the same as us, and that I mean, one time he ordered all these books and stuff like that from Time Life and all this kind of stuff, and every program we came on, we saw it. And one time he met a black man that lived in our area in Oregon, kind of rural Oregon, which there was almost no minorities there of any kind, other than women. Women is, being a minority. But Dad, he didn't. He was. My father was woke when it came to black people, but he still did not. He never talked about it. He never ranted or anything about pretty much anything, but he never voiced his opinion on how women should be biblical. I mean, a lot of his stuff was really based in Bible stuff. He was a hardcore Christian, as much as he could be. As much as anybody really can be without walking around with a halo on their head. And but he met an older black man that was in our area, and in that area that was almost unheard of. Um, like my grade school, there was no black kids. I don't think there was any other kind of race whatsoever. I don't even know if there was any Hispanic kids. Nothing. No Asian kids. I didn't meet an Asian person until I was in high school maybe. But anyway, and he took me up to the guy's house and he introduced me, and I was like, okay, this is some kind of an event that's happening here, because it wasn't natural. It wasn't like, oh, we just happened to meet this guy, or this is somebody my dad knows, or whatever. He specifically must have prearranged it with the fella. Really nice man, especially to. I mean, my dad was, like I say, my dad was a really nice guy, and so it's possible that my dad approached him and told him, what his history, where he's from, and all that kind of stuff. And then he's got this son that he's probably worried about, which is, anybody reaching that certain age is a person to worry about. And I was way that way, full of energy. And my dad took me up there and introduced me to that man. He was a very, very nice man. And it made an impression on me because it was such an event. I mean, it was obvious my dad really had an intention about what he was doing. And, that this very nice and intelligent man was participating in this. To me, it felt like, both of these kind, intelligent people, adults, were focusing on me for some reason. And it was just an introduction and a tiny little chat between them, and stuff. And nothing major was said, no lessons taught, any of that kind of stuff, just that. But it was really obvious from both of them that they were doing a presentation of some type. And it was something that was foreign to both of them too. That it made an impression on me, and of course, it stuck with me my whole life. And as usual, I don't remember what I was talking about. The beginning of this subject was that how I jump around like crazy. Well, I have this board next to me that I look at now. And it's to remind me of what I was talking about, because I can have this one-sided conversation that jumps around like crazy. And then I used to have these conversations with my dad that were oftentimes on religion and life and, racism and his past and stuff like this. And and I saw the shit that my dad went through with my siblings and my mother and stuff like that when I was a kid, and I had only caught in snippets at the time of the shit he had been through in the past. His childhood. He would tell me. He told me things he didn't tell my mom. I found out many years after he died, but about his childhood and stuff like that. And some of the things were really confusing. That how could he act one way, but then have experienced this other thing? But as a kid, that was a learning experience, and it's actually still been teaching me all the way up into my middle age, which is not now. I always think my middle age must have been in my 20s, because my dad's people don't live long. But yeah, the so anyway, I'm gonna jump off of that one too. I'm writing SOPs and basically a policies and practices manual for my business, which is called professional maintenance consulting. And I specialize, and it's just because it's what I did for many years, in property management maintenance. So like apartment complexes, apartment buildings, single family homes, but like a lot of them that are rentals, right? And I've been a supervisor, which I know when it sounds silly when you say supervisor, it doesn't mean much to some, because like in an office, a supervisor, it's kind of a lame role, unless I'm getting that wrong. But you literally just supervise, as far as I know. But a maintenance supervisor, it's a real actual title. Okay, it's not just a supervisor. A maintenance supervisor should be considered a maintenance manager. Um, on a an apartment complex, it could be 1,000 apartments. Like in Eugene, Oregon, when I kind of started out as a maintenance tech, and then a maintenance. Well, no, I was a maintenance supervisor when I started there. I'd been a maintenance tech at hotels for 3 years, but when I started out there, I just was really lucky in that I got under the tutelage of a very, very experienced maintenance supervisor. And he wanted me to be able to take over for him, because I didn't realize, but he was about to retire. He was in his 70s, and so it made sense, but he seemed spry as all get out. But yeah. So some of the stuff you're going to see here is a great little lesson in what ADHD looks like for adults. We always talk about ADHD like on everything. I'm on a platform called Red Note, and it's from China, and they really talk about ADHD a lot. That it's like celebrated almost. More than just like a PSA, right? And I think it's brilliant. There's a ton of people that are saying ADHD is like the next step in evolution of the human species, and I disagree with that. ADHD is a malfunction, um, because it does exactly what it's shown, what the title says. It's the lack of focus. There are medications for it, like Ritalin was the one when I was a kid. I didn't get on it. My cousin did. My parents were afraid that there was always pros and cons. My parents were afraid that I wouldn't adapt, that I wouldn't learn how to cope with my ADHD. And they didn't know it was ADHD. They just called it being hyper. Okay. My cousin, his parents took him to doctors, and he got diagnosed, and he got put on Ritalin, and I don't know what it solved for him. I wasn't in their household, so um, but he was straight up exactly like me that way, though. Otherwise, we had each of our households had 5 kids in them, and each of our now I don't know about their household. Their household seemed like that there was 2 or 3 of them that were bonkers, like that were sort of like me. But in my household, there was one. So you had 4 kids ranging from older teenagers all the way down to little bitties. And I was right dab in the middle, smack dab in the middle. And and it was always a thing where that there was always trouble, and it was always me. And you had uh, variety of things happening, either getting smacked around by the older ones, uh, or getting taunted stupidly by at least one of the younger ones. And so I was always like the Tasmanian devil spinning, And it's funny because everybody, when I was a kid, everybody, extended family, people I barely knew or didn't, because I was always going to the hospital. I was always in the ER. I mean, the ER, our local ER, which was a pretty good size ER compared to now, um, attached to a hospital, sent us Christmas cards because I was there so often. I guess they considered us frequent flyers or something. I don't know, but everybody, whenever they would get me, just like, oh, what do you get Steve, for a present? These extended family people were always getting me Tasmanian devil dolls. And I'm like, at some point, I mean, after my third or fourth one, I asked my mom, I'm like, first off, why do they think I like dolls? And the next one is, who's telling them I like the Tasmanian devil? I don't even, Bugs Bunny and stuff. It was okay, but it wasn't something I enjoyed like to collect or, ever talked about, ever watched. It would, if I was sitting down to watch cartoons, if Tasmanian Devil came on, it was just because it was on and I was there. I mean, when I was a kid, little kid, I really loved Popeye. I really loved Batman and Robin, all that kind of stuff. But I never ever cared about the Tasmanian Devil type of thing until years later. And nobody ever told me, by the way. And then years later, I realized it's because I was the Tasmanian Devil. I was always this little tornado spinning everywhere, wrecking everything in its path, And that's no joke. That's a great analogy. I remember, you know, I was always hot and cold, you know. Some people would think of it almost as bipolar, except bipolar is different, and I've gotten quite an education on bipolar at one time via my second wife. But ADHD is a kid that one day becomes an adult, and I've never been medicated for it, so I always had way too much energy. I always had way too much, I when I before we got married, my third wife and I, who we should have been the only ones that ever got married to each other ever. I knew her when I was 16, 15, and I fell in love with her when I was 16. I didn't know that. I didn't know what that was. I didn't understand at all. But I was at the time you could have even said deeply infatuated. The problem is it lasted forever. And it wasn't a fantasy, like a passing thing or whatever like that. Um, when I went off to basic training and AIT and stuff, and when I came home eventually to be in the National Guard and had graduated high school and all this stuff, and then went into off to AIT and all that, um, she apparently had gotten married during that thing because she would never date me. I tried to get her to, in my pretty lame little way and stuff. And because we were friends, but we were kind of a group of friends, and I never thought that she paid one iota of notice to me. I knew she knew who I was simply because we were friends, right? But like I say, there was several of us that were friends, and she there was a summer she had gotten married. Her husband, her boyfriend, but then husband had gone off to basic training for the Army also. And I was home, he was gone. And so I was doing my normal, I had a motorcycle and stuff, and I was everywhere. And once in a while she'd see me and flag me down, want me to give her a ride. And, totally normal stuff. We were completely platonic, not because I wanted that, but because that's what she, I and I got the whole point of the marriage. Once that happened, it changed everything. I knew I had no chance. I mean, I didn't want a chance. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want to coax her into cheating. I didn't want to be a person that was helping somebody cheat on their marriage, which is kind of like cheating on yourself, even if you're not married or with a girlfriend or anything like that. But during I don't know if it was a summer or whatever, but we hung out a lot, and just her and I, and with a lot of those same friends. But we had graduated high school, so everybody went their own way, and now we were hanging out with all kinds of different friends, from the next town over, now that we're both kind of grown, and we're expanding our friendships and stuff, and both had jobs and all that kind of stuff. Well, she was waiting basically for him to get done with a basic and AIT, and then they would go off to Alaska. They already knew their post and everything. So, all right. And I was in the National Guard, which was, located in the next town over. So I wasn't going anywhere. Even though I was trying to go, I was coaxed as a kid that I was going to go full time, or that I was going to join the National Guard. And then as soon as I got out of AIT, that I would go full time. Great. My dad said that's what he did. And he was in the Navy for 14 years, He would have been in for 20 if some bad shit hadn't happened. And so that's what I was convinced I was going to get to do, except that my first sergeant would not allow the transfer. It was called a stop loss. They were low on personnel, and he said that I couldn't transfer. And this actually went on for, once I started asking, it was like 3.5 years, which is nutty to me. That you can't replace somebody in that amount of time. You can't get more people in that amount of time. But anyway, it actually kind of fucked up my life plan, because by the time that I was going to be able to go from what I had been doing to full time, a new presidency had come into being, which I voted in, and I didn't regret what I did ever. It's just bad luck. It's called life. If you want to make God laugh, the saying is, tell him your plans. But then they wouldn't take any prior service people, because they had a buildup under President George Bush Sr. For the Gulf. And not just the Gulf, but they had a buildup because of the Cold War for a long time. And Clinton wanted to get the debt paid down. Now, Reagan had got the debt way up there, but he had to. That was a game of chess he was playing against the Soviet Union, which were a real actual threat back then. Back then, they were a world power, equal to us and superior to us in some ways, so with a lot of their technology. Under better management than is currently with Putin. He is an idiot. He has totally ruined that country. But anyway, we'll come back to that. So yeah, I write down these stuff on the storyboard of mine right here to keep me on subject. And occasionally I get off subject, and then while I'm in the middle of something, my ADHD helps me decide to not focus on that one thing anymore. And I literally, in the middle of a thought, get distracted by another thought, squirrel, like that. And you guys have just witnessed that a bunch of times. One of the reasons I like doing these videos is, especially if they're not scripted, because I watch ones that are scripted all the time, is that you guys get to see, and I get to see later too, if I watch these, how that works. I mean, it's really embarrassing in some ways. When I was a lot younger, it was a lot more embarrassing. It was hard to have a conversation with somebody and not seem like a complete idiot. But that started happening, the really distracted thing during conversation started happening when I was about 14. And before that, I was kind of able to kind of keep conversations together if I participated in them, I suppose. But I know I did a lot with my dad on all kinds of subjects, and we had some great conversations. I mean, I considered them great. My dad probably was laboring under, having to listen to this moron But it wasn't just me expounding my knowledge, it was me talking and asking questions and trying to get some concepts and things, which I did. We had really great conversations. He was an incredibly intelligent man. And I never realized how intelligent, like quantifiable, his quantified intelligence. But many years after he died, like at least 20 years after he died, um, he had the highest security rating in the military under Majestic, which is Majestic is the highest. It's so high that not even every president has it. Presidents are elected, and because of that, they're not always trustworthy, like the one we got now and stuff. That guy, I personally would have a really hard time giving him a secret clearance, much less the different levels of top secret clearance, you know, uh, and if it was up to me, he would never even know that Majestic existed. And I know he doesn't have Majestic because when Eisenhower made that clearance, the wording was specific. He said, and he specifically said, not every president gets Majestic, and unless they're willing to play ball, which means like George Bush Sr. He would have been probably the last president I can picture that should have had Majestic clearance, because he was old school. He was World War II level old school, and he directed the CIA for a while, like an interim, I believe. But anyway, he was the kind that could know everything there is to know in America, and understand his duty, and I'm sure he did. But like I say, Clinton publicly protested basically that he asked questions that he knew had real answers, but that they told him they weren't allowed to. They told him that he could not know, that he had been found untrustworthy, by this system, this vetting system. And so that was it. He didn't like that. He tried a whole bunch of things to get that cleared. And I was a Clinton fan. I voted for him twice. Even when he did stupid shit, he was a brilliant man, but he couldn't keep his dick in his pants, and then of course that all shit always comes out. And he did the number one thing to me that is the number one most damaging thing to America. And he did that thing, which was embarrass America. I had to take oaths, when getting into the military and while in the military because of my security clearance and stuff. But one of the oaths I had to take stated right in the middle of it that I will not embarrass my country and that I will never embarrass my country. That's important. I mean, how other people perceive you is how they treat you, and you have a brilliant man who he was straight brilliant. He solved the debt problem. He did all kinds of stuff, but he fucked up the first Gulf situation when, Bush Sr. took us to war. He wanted a war, but he wanted a short one so that he could have been a wartime president. I understand, there's a lot to that. It's a complicated thing. And he was a career politician, career military. I mean, everything, I don't know about career military, but he was in during World War II. So most people that go through, I should say, most people that go through combat and stuff, as a military person, don't do it as a career after that. Now, Navy, I don't know, because their level of combat and like a fighter pilot's level of combat or an infantryman's level of combat are totally different. Okay, but most of those people get out and try to put their brains back together, to become normal people again. Probably never happens, but they try. People that stay in, that after something like that, it happens. It's common, but it's not rare, right? But it's not the no, it's not the majority of the time. I don't know how those people do it. Tough in some ways, just built right in other ways. I've met plenty of people that did some crazy amount of combat, infantry level combat and stuff, special operations and stuff. And some of them are crazy and some of them aren't. And I don't know how the ones that aren't stay that way. but it's possible. It's entirely possible if you process shit correctly when you're out and about, if you got good leadership that helps you do that. I've gone, I think the count maybe 47 different subjects so far in this particular conversation. But anyway, today is Tuesday, November like 11th or 10th or something. I'm looking at my watch because there is a date thing on it, except I can't see it because I got eye surgery years ago, and so I can see awesome far off. I can't see shit close up without glasses on, and I just looked, and oh, there they are. They're here, and now I don't really care about the date, but now I'm going to look because I said something about it. 11th. But anyway, I'm sitting here writing my SOPs and stuff like that, and the practices and policies manual for the business. And with my business, what I'll be doing is, first off, I'm selling a product with my business. It's a couple of different products, really, 2 different levels. The first product is an assessment. It's new to me, and I haven't said it to myself over and over enough to be able to remember what it's called, but let's see if I can remember it actually. It's the Operation Excellence Audit. Boom, I got it. See, I have a terrible memory. I do have a terrible memory. I used to box and I used to do different kind of security stuff, and I've had 27 concussions that are documented. I mean, I don't know what I had before I started with the military because none of those really got documented in a medical chart type of thing. But once I was 17, they started making a file on that kind of shit. And so then I kept the file going, and then I worked on towboats, and I did different kinds of things that were, had workplace accidents and boxing and stuff like that. And anyway, over time I had 27 concussions. And I told a buddy that one time, and he didn't believe me. I mean, he's no medical person. In fact, he's not that bright. But he said that if you'd had 20 concussions, you wouldn't even be able to tie your shoes. And I'm like, fuck. Well, it should fucking tell you I'm actually doing pretty darn good. I have a shit memory. It's literally like taking your laptop computer and throwing it on the ground, right? All kinds of parts and pieces inside, resistors, chips, diodes, all those things would be flying around in there and getting bumped and getting loose and cracking the circuit board and all that kind of crap. And you can't do that very many times and have it still work. Well, the things in your head are bolted down better, but there are injuries that can happen with concussive force. And concussion is the swelling of the brain, which is, then gets compressed, in your head, that kind of thing, and damage happens. Basically, circulatory issues, blood vessels get damaged, and all kinds of stuff, so which feeds all the parts of your brain. And when any parts of your brain goes without what it needs to live, little places in your brain die, and that's the same thing a stroke does, right? Except it's called that's not the same thing as a mini stroke. That's a TIA. Different completely. I've had one of those, but these little places in your brain die, and then that little tiny whatever it did, some type of reasoning or even just a pathway through for your nerves to go to another place, then gets blocked, and so then your brain though has a really amazing capability of growing new nerves pathways. Like, that highway is destroyed, fine, we'll go around it. We won't repair it, we'll go around it and make a new one. And your brain does that constantly your whole life. It does it a lot when you're younger, because the assumption is with evolution is that when you're younger, you're going to be in a lot of dangerous situations that you're not prepared for, and that you're going to sustain a lot of injuries, and that that you need to be able to function past that. Well, as you get older, all that stuff slows down because by that time they're like, well, you've had your chance to have babies now, and so evolution says that's all we need you for. We don't need you for anything else. Just to be here. You're one entity. We need you to produce like 3 or 4 entities, right? So that the exponential growth continues, which is what bacteria does, what plants do, everything. And that's why your brain chemistry and your body, DNA replicating and all that kind of stuff starts to slow down because at some point you're no longer necessary. At some point, evolutionarily, you're no longer a functioning, important part of the group. Because you can't procreate anymore. Kind of sad to say that, but that's just the way it works biologically, mathematically, right? So the good news is in America we've come up with all kinds of fixes for that, where that we supplement people's chemistry and some different things. We discover things all the time. And by the way, I gave a talk the other day about my theory of super AI and what it'll be and all this. Well, I also wrote it, I think yesterday, and put it on Facebook last night. If you see my stuff, and if you ever get on Facebook, Steve Underwood, I recommend looking at it. It's a theory. Everybody can have a theory. There's the way things become a real theory and get published and all that kind of stuff is if it's basically scientifically based, with a lot of research and stuff like that, where you can cite a lot of things, and then it's submitted to the scientific community, and that scientific peers can look at it and try to reprove it, and examine it from all kinds of different angles that maybe you haven't thought of and things like that to see if it stands up, if it holds water. And then if enough people look at it and say, hey, listen, we've looked at this over and over and over again in different ways, and it's legit, there's no reason why this shouldn't be this way, then a theory becomes an actual theory, a published theory, just like anything else out there that's known about science. Scientific method says that nothing's real unless you can prove it over and over again, by different people in different ways. So otherwise you look at something or you observe it and you say, I think that works this way. Well, that's what I've done so far. And I'm not serious about it in any way, shape, or form. So I'm never ever going to try to get it published or even try to get it to, people to review it and stuff like that. I think it's a fascinating subject to me, and I have some really strong beliefs that have come out of a lot of research. My level of research, I'm not a scientist. I am an educated issue, but to some degree, but I'm not a scientist. Clearly, my handle used to be the local idiot or your local idiot, and it's not. That's a self-imposed nickname, which are all the coolest people have those self-imposed ones. So anyway, you'll have to make your own assessment that way. I stopped calling myself a local idiot on the podcast though, because I've started a consulting business, and I was told by somebody that calling yourself an idiot and branding yourself that way probably is not a great way to get people to call you for consulting work. And I'm like, oh, that's legit, I guess. It was just a joke, but now, it can be destructive, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, I was sitting here writing out my and so the first thing I do with and I told you the name of that, it's an assessment. I call it an audit, but it's an assessment. I go into a business and to a property, say a property that's like this one, it's like 250 apartments, and it's got 2 pools and all these different kinds of things. The age of the property, all these kinds of things are examined. Even the age of the roof, all the roofs on the entire place, because they all have to be changed at once when that happens. And they're 25-year roofs and stuff. And you have to inspect a smattering of apartments so that you get an idea of the average age of like water heaters and things like that. And so you can give a projection of what your capital expenses are going to be for the next 10 years. Like if a roof is coming up, that's a devastating thing to have to come up if and any property that's not been preparing from day one, from the last roof to the next roof, any property that's not been preparing from day one by creating an account, basically, where the money will be safe for big capital investments like that, is they're in real trouble. They don't almost never last. They end up going under, because people that are involved in it, like the bank and bank officers and things like that, are saying, there's a date that this place is going to expire because it hasn't been well maintained, which means it hasn't been well managed, from several levels of management. A property like the one I'm on right now is millions of dollars. And one big fuck up, like it, and it can happen. I've seen it. It's tragic when it does, but when people, slumlord types, own them outright rather than having the bank involved, it all the responsibility bottlenecks to the owner. If they're really good with money but not really good with physical investments like properties and stuff like this, it's entirely possible that they will not get the advice or take the advice that they need to set up accounts for capital investments like new roofs and a full repipe underground and stuff like that. It's a big project too. I came onto a property in Portland one time that I discovered the need that it needed a full repipe, which means every square inch of the property dug up that was underground, and all of the exposed pipe to environment, which is like pipes underground and next to dirt, needed to be replaced, and even some that were underneath buildings, which is like underneath slab concrete. So I mean, the entire property was going to have to be emptied, or at worst, like half at a time, which means half the property would be emptied. All that construction would happen over there, and then the half that hadn't been emptied, then that has to be emptied. But they could always move over to the other side if they were willing to accept the new price of the apartments, because they would be in much better condition. So they would have gotten themselves into a much higher price range. And I mean, so it's a huge project, huge expenditure from all different directions. But anyway, I do this assessment about how what has been happening, what needs to be happening, and how to do it, basically. And when I make the assessment, it's a bottom line assessment. They could have it be better if they wanted, but what the property needs to function properly, in perpetuity, is this, And the maintenance job is actually fairly easy in a lot of ways. It's literally to maintain. You don't have to do anything fancy. Just keep it exactly like it looks, brand new. Every apartment, when somebody moves out, has to be returned back to its original perfect condition for the next person to be able to move in. Now, does that mean the carpet's brand new every time? No. It needs to look brand new every time. It can't have stains. It can't have, visible wear, that kind of thing. Carpets, vinyl, floors, paint. The apartments don't get full painted every time, like every square inch kind of a thing. All the walls and the ceiling are all one color. And that's so it's inexpensive to buy paint, because it's easy. You don't have to try to figure out color matches and all that kind of stuff. And also, maintenance people don't have to bring tons of different kinds of paint to an apartment. Now, a lot of apartments complexes, a lot of management companies use color as an incentive, which is a good thing. They'll give like 2 or 3 different color choices. and it'll be like an accent color. So if somebody wants to re-up, they can get one of these three colors in on a specific wall, or two or three different walls that the company has chosen to do, and they're partly chosen by decorating experts, right? And we've paid for that. And so if a person wants to, they can have a particular wall. The whole place is white, and or usually a little off white with like the best sheen is eggshell. It's not completely flat. It's not completely gloss. It's in the middle. It holds up the best. But that way, it's all one color. That way, when what's called a turn or a make ready is being done, the person brings in their 5-gallon bucket of that paint and spot cleans. They clean things. If they see spots, they see smudges, they see handprints or whatever, you clean those things first. You dry those things off and you clean it with TSP. So it's like trisodium phosphate, which means that when the paint will stick to it, right? It's always eggshell. It's not high gloss. That means that when you do the touch-up painting and stuff like that, it will match. It will blend in. If it's too high gloss, the gloss goes away after a while, and then the sheens don't match. So there's reason for everything that way. And it's much faster when you can spot paint it rather than having to do a whole paint. Huge mistakes that properties make is we had a company where they hired a union trained painter, and that's all he did. And it was just a huge waste. That guy was never, he would never be busy enough. So you're wasting money that way. And time, because, each turnover or make ready should take, 24 hours. It's the optimal, thing. If you've been managing your apartment complex correctly, turns take about 24 hours. There's a lot of turns that take a week, because the management has not been doing their job. I see apartment complexes all the time where that apartments are down for weeks. My wife goes to different apartment complexes for the company she works for all over the country. She was a high performing manager and just doing her job correctly. And so they hired her for this other thing to go into low performing, underperforming properties and fix what they got going on. And whenever we get to a new place, we all have guesses as to what's going on because of our experience levels, both of us. And we can almost diagnose what the issue is before we even arrive. And sure enough, once we get there, we start seeing the telltale red flags. And it's always an individual. There can be all kinds of problems, all kinds of individuals, but it always starts with one. And it's usually somebody at a top level. Not the top level, but like it could be a manager all the way down to the lowest, brand newest maintenance guy, right? And that manager has ruined everybody from there down. Not always, very often. It could be a regional manager who has just ruined everybody below her, which is, other managers and stuff like that. It's not as common. Regionals are usually on top of it, but I've seen one regional two regionals I've met. One was just absolutely terrible. I mean, should have never gotten the job, was mistakenly hired for that job. And I still don't know whatever happened with that person. Another company that I worked for that I loved the company. They are in my opinion, top quality. They hired a regional in the correct ways. She had worked for them and businesses that they had acquired over time. So she worked in a straight line for a very long time, but then along the way, she reached where her peak should have been, and they promoted her up and beyond that, and then didn't watch her carefully enough. and her people and stuff. And then she created havoc underneath her by playing favorites and taking certain people under her wing, like, oh, you're my favorite, I really like you because I hired you, and then ignored the fact that those people were fucking idiots. And those people that were idiots then allowed other people that were also idiots, but because they were their favorite, to do things. And that was a big mess. I was happy as a clam to get out of there, just to get away from that scene, because I was in a position where that I was caught right in the middle of that stuff. And I should have known. I should have listened to myself. When I was I was paying too much attention to the fact that I used to work for the company, and I had loved it, and the fact that I opened the property that I was going to, and I loved it. I always wanted to work on that property, even from day one before the construction was done. I was always a little jealous of that property, even though my property was great too, that I worked on, but I oversaw several others. So when I was 17 years later, I was looking at getting onto that property and interviewing and stuff like that. And I was coming back to the company. Well, it was a different company by this time, but it was, small fish got eaten by big fish and stuff, and the big fish was an awesome company. But when I started interviewing and stuff, I started getting these little, almost like body language signals from the existing maintenance supervisor, and then was basically was being introduced to other maintenance supervisors who were also giving me the high sign, which I just ignored. Whatever they were, whatever the body language was, whatever the, hey, don't do it, kind of a thing. And that's what it was. I constantly was getting that. And it from like 4 different maintenance supervisors that were in the same company, but unrelated to that property. And this is me being me, I guess. I ignored all that shit because I wanted something that was shiny and awesome. And I remembered it a certain way, but it wasn't that way anymore, and it's all about who runs it. And in retrospect, as soon as I took over the property, I realized instantly that they were right. I should have listened. And then I stubbornly tried to tell myself, well, maybe you can fix it. Maybe you can wait them out. I've never been one of those. I've never been a person that could wait people out. I can't do that. Shitheads have a lot more staying power than I do, because I don't have any tolerance. I just don't have any tolerance for inefficiency. I don't have any tolerance for straight up corruption. I don't have any tolerance for unprofessionalism. I have patience to a certain point, to train people that way, or to even people that are over me, to give them warning and to give them direction if they need it. They should never need that. Not people over me, but it's happened many times in my life. And then when they don't go the direction they should go as a normal professional, I can mention it to somebody above them, but it almost never works. My father had the same exact problem for himself. He didn't take a promotion one time. The company wanted him, even though there was a guy that was more experienced than he was in some ways, in years, but just not in training, in his particular shop. And he told the company he felt uncomfortable with taking that promotion because this other man was so much older than my dad, and that it would hurt that guy to be passed over for a younger man with better training. And I don't want to emulate foolish behavior. My dad was no fool, but he didn't want to do that, but it would have felt wrong to him. And sure enough, and I watched this whole thing unfold. He got to the point where that he made a really, really bad, my dad made a really, really bad decision, and we had to basically move out of the entire area and basically escape what he was doing. He had a great job, great paying job, would have loved it if it wasn't for this shithead above him, that he had an opportunity to not let be above him, and the company saw it apparently, and they gave him the opportunity to take the natural role, and he didn't do it. And then he said he was starting to have dreams about killing this guy, and that's not my dad. And so he was like, we got to go. I can't stay here anymore, And unfortunately, his job was very specialized, and he would have had to have really changed gears, to do something else. He could have easily done it. He could have done something entirely different with his electronics background. But might not have paid as well, and he would have seen in that as like almost a step backwards or something. I don't know how it would have gone that way, but we ended up moving away to some really terrible places that I didn't like. I mean, that was my opinion. But that is how it is. So I did the exact same thing, basically. After I already saw it and was taught that lesson and stuff like that. But, I'm one of those people that does that constantly. I have terrible judgment when it comes to stuff that other people can see pretty obviously, or people that are offering you a position or a promotion or whatever can see how good of an opportunity it would be or how much of a difference it could make for you. But you got to be smart enough, the whole, you lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Yeah. That's me. So anyway, I'm as I was telling you, I'm writing this thing, and so the two products I sell is the assessment, which is called, I'm gonna say it again for my own practice, the professional operations. Oh, actually, I did get that wrong. It's the operational excellence audit. See, I got it right. And I sell that for $1,500. That's a flat fee. Every property pays the same. They have to pay for traveling expenses. So if they're far away, and I am not interested in flying for a while, because our whole nation right now is fucked, and air traffic control is one of the situations. So I drive. I have a van, and I drive. To get there. I don't do hotels and stuff while I do that. That's why I have a van. And, but I get there, I do an assessment, and then I give them the assessment, which is an assessment of what the property needs, what the property's been getting, and how to fix it. And then there's detailed instructions as to what to do, to fix that. There's a whole lot of people that it doesn't matter what kind of instructions you give them, they don't know how to do things or correlate things or coordinate things or manage. They're an investor, they're not a doer. And sometimes investors were given their money and they don't know shit about shit, or they might know a lot of things about banks or, investments or, financial stuff, but they don't know a thing about telling people what to do or mentoring people or all those kinds of things. So sometimes they want you to do the work, and that's in consulting, that's called after work. And so for that, I can do all those things. I can hire everybody. I can train everybody. I can when I say train everybody, I can get everybody on the same page. The supervisor with all of his work, the property manager may be an existing property manager who just needs a little education and a binder so that they can refer back to it, or a program on computer so they can refer back to it of what their responsibilities are and how they're supposed to interact with the maintenance supervisor. Because the one person that's above the maintenance supervisor on a property is the property manager. But the property manager, if they ever commit the sin of micromanagement, they will destroy that property. Like I say, we see that a lot, where that a manager somewhere is the problem, and on the property we're at right now, that unfortunately that turned out to be the exact case. It's so much better when it's something like, that you just can't keep a good maintenance supervisor, or a company doesn't have a maintenance program to train them with. They just assume, yeah, just go out. Oh, you know how to fix stuff? Well, just fix stuff, and that's not enough. That's a terrible, I've worked for a lot of companies like that. I've fixed a lot of companies like that. And it's always run by slumlord types who have had their businesses forever. You can have as a slumlord, you can have a profit margin while you grind up employees for decades. I worked for one like that before too. And, and it was kind of funny. I worked for that one, and they hired me out of another maintenance supervisor job to move from Portland to Eugene, Oregon, um, because their maintenance program got out of hand, and and somebody hired a bunch of construction workers to be their maintenance team because they had some construction work they wanted done. And when I got there, I told them from the get-go that I said, the first problem here is that you've got the wrong people hired. I know that you want to get all these raised patios, like second floor patios, redone and stuff like that. You do not hire the guys to do that as maintenance men. That is supposed to be a contractor, a construction contractor. It's the same people that redo your roof. They're a roofing company. The people that redo, like all these decks, they need to be a company that they can be just carpenters and stuff like that, but they need to be carpenters, not carpenters and maintenance guys. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same training. They don't know shit about shit in maintenance. And your maintenance team is designed and set up specifically for maintenance. They do not have the time, and a lot of them don't have the training to do a roof or to do these other big construction projects. It's all about timing. And so there's ways to do things, and that's part of the SOPs. And so that goes into this SOP thing. It's a really giant collection of 25 years of experience. More than that, really, but I'm saying 25 because it freaks out people when I tell them how long it's actually been. And so I can sell just the binder, no assessment, nothing. I can sell them it's called a maintenance kit. It's the binder that tells them how many, what the formula is, how many maintenance workers, what the maintenance positions are. A maintenance supervisor is only worth half of a maintenance guy because they have a lot of things to do besides everyday maintenance, unclogging toilets and stuff. Then the bottom position is called a groundskeeper. They don't mow lawns and stuff like this. They basically call them a groundskeeper so that people don't confuse them with a maintenance worker. Okay. A groundskeeper sounds basic because it is. This is a brand new maintenance person. They might have an aptitude, but they don't know shit about shit. Okay. And so the first thing that everybody does in the morning maintenance wise, that's from supervisor on down, is they walk the property doing what's called a trash sweep. And, and everybody's carrying a bucket and a trash grabber, like a little grabber thing, extended grabber. And they pick up all the trash. First thing I noticed when we got to the property we're on right now is nobody's doing that. I saw a guy walking around one time, but he's definitely not doing his job. He's missing everything. A lot of companies will have the groundskeeper only do that, which, then that guy's taken 4 hours to do that because he's by himself, as opposed to 1 hour for everybody. But the groundskeeper is the lowest of the low job, and he's only shadowing other people until the maintenance supervisor decides he's up to enough of a grade to do simple jobs. And then he does simple jobs. Only the maintenance supervisor chooses the jobs for everybody every day. All the work orders that are in, they get distributed amongst the maintenance people. He takes a few. The groundskeeper takes a few, and all the maintenance techs take the rest. The maintenance supervisor should know much more and be way more efficient than all the different maintenance, like repair jobs or whatever, than all the techs put together. But the problem is they have so many other things to do that are, involved in the shop, in planning, in budget, and all that kinds of stuff. that training, everything. There's a big old list of things they do. That they can only do be half of a maintenance guy time wise for work orders and turns. Everybody does turns if the company's run properly, and everybody does, meaning maintenance people, and everybody does repair things, work orders, in people's apartments and stuff. But like I say, the groundskeeper and the maintenance supervisor are only worth half of a maintenance person put together. And so the idea is it's one maintenance technician per 100 apartments. And so if you have 250 apartments, you never round down. You only ever round up. So if you're lucky, you have 230 apartments, let's say, that anything above 200, that's one more maintenance guy. Okay. But the one of the ways to figure fractions is that you do have a maintenance supervisor and a groundskeeper. So sometimes you have more maintenance guys than you need by a fraction, right? That's okay. You never ever want to have less maintenance people than you need, even by a fraction, because somebody's extra fast or anything like that. That always comes back to bite people one way or the other. And I've seen it many, many, many times. And so that's one of the basics. And then you got to train everybody with these SOPs where that there are certain things that you do, the soft skills. You show up to work every morning on time. There's no such thing as asking people to show up early. People do that if they're really good, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say to other people, oh, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. And I'm like, no, that's not true at all. There's this law thing, caveman. And, everybody under me gets trained. And the whole point of training everybody is you're looking for your replacement. Okay. Because if you're with a property or if you're with a company that is a real investment, they're looking to expand at all times. There's no such thing as enough, not with a business. If businesses aren't expanding, they're dying. And that's just a true fact about business. And I have an MBA. I know. Even if I didn't have an MBA, I would know this. Basically because of my experience. But eventually that maintenance supervisor, that really experienced maintenance supervisor, is either going to move on to another property, a new one that is acquired, or that the person that the maintenance supervisor trusts the most to be his replacement is going to be the maintenance supervisor at the next property with a little bit of supervision from the maintenance supervisor, to get him up to speed, in the being by himself kind of a thing. It's a whole thing of, the military used to say that we are not interested in people. We're not interested in promoting people to sergeant that isn't willing to train people and teach people. So if you don't want to do that, get out, simple, get D4 and then don't re-up, because we don't want you. So if you don't like the responsibility of training people and being responsible for people, you don't need to be a sergeant. You don't need to be in the military. Go sweep the streets or, serve hamburgers to people, whatever you want to do. But get the fuck out. And that's why every single person ever under me gets trained to be my replacement. Because where everybody starts as a career, eventually they got to get up to where I'm at, That's my theory, and that's what anybody that's a normal supervisor thinks, I can't tell you how many places I've gone to where that somebody didn't want to train anybody, including me, because they would literally come out, well, I don't want you to be replacing me one day. I'm like, man, you're a fucking moron, Pardon my French. I'm a cusser, by the way, in case you didn't notice. So yeah, I'm putting together that and the maintenance kit. The maintenance kit sells for $500, like $4.99, and it's a starter kit basically. If somebody wants to try to do everything themselves, or they're just scared of the $1,500, fine, no problem. They can take this smaller thing, which is my binder of all my SOPs, of just how the maintenance part of the company is set up, and instructions. But I've never looked at their property. I don't know what their problems are. I don't know what they have the tools I bring to an inspection and to an assessment. They have the tools I bring. but they don't have my assessment, which is a really important thing because not every property is the same, and some have some really tricky shit on them. The tricky thing isn't from when a property's brand new, even though that's not a falling off a log, believe me. The tricky thing is, what have all the maniacs done over the years to a property? What have they ignored? What kind of policies have they created that were just destructive to not just destructive to the people and to the public, which are residents and the community around them, but to the property itself. Are you going to end up, redoing stuff way ahead of time? Capital expenses are a big deal. I used to hear that capital expenses where if you could take a property, turn it upside down and shake it, anything that would fall off is not a capital expense. Anything that wouldn't fall out, that's a capital expense. That's kind of simplistic, but because there's a lot more detail to it than that. But it kind of gives you an idea. At a certain age of a property, entire units need to be updated. So a unit would be completely stripped out of all of its appliances, completely stripped out of all of its flooring, and all the walls and the ceiling would be painted white and returned to perfect condition. So the apartment that we're in now, which we were given, which is, it's a nice apartment in a lot of ways, but it was not rent ready. This apartment gets a D, a letter D at best, because there were really terrible problems with the walls and the ceilings, and each appliance does not work right. Each one, refrigerator. I mean, they have a lot of great appliances: refrigerator, washer, dryer, stove, oven, and dishwasher. None of them work properly. Not one of them should have been left in an apartment ready that was rent ready. The refrigerator never shuts off. It's constantly running. If I was paying for my own electricity, which I am not, thank the Lord, that would be costing me a lot of money. As it is, it's costing the company money. Not my problem. I don't even work here. I'm just living here and writing my business stuff while I'm doing it. The dishwasher leaks like a sieve. The drawers don't work. The top drawer doesn't work. The rack doesn't work right. And the stove oven has a bunch of problems. It won't maintain temperature and stuff like that. It wasn't even set to level. I mean, really basic shit like that. The washer dryer, I think the dryer works good, but the washer will not wring all the water out. It gets done and the clothes are soaked like as if they're standing in water. And then when you try to physically make it spin the clothes again, that doesn't work. And I'm guessing that's why it doesn't work in the whole place, is because the entire timer on top needs to be completely replaced, which is not hard to do. It's easy as pie if you know how. Most maintenance guys don't know how to fix appliances because they've never been trained, by an actual appliance person. A good supervisor has been trained by actual, in their time learning of work, they've been trained by actual appliance people, every single one. And for me, that was really easy because I took over a property one time that was brand new. In fact, I started there before it was done. And all the appliances, which was every one that I named, are brand spanking new, and they're all under warranty for 1 year. And so every single time something happens to one of those appliances, I made sure that when it was being fixed, I mean, 9 times out of 10 I had to anyway because they were being fixed in occupied apartments. And so I had to be there with the technician. But I paid close attention and I asked questions and I learned how to fix everything, refrigerators, freezers, washer dryers, dishwashers, stove ovens. I learned how to fix even the range hoods. I learned how to fix every single one of them from somebody that specialized in that stuff. And that's something that in one way or the other, mine was the easiest way, but in one way or the other, anybody that's qualified to be a maintenance supervisor has to have gone through stuff like that. I mean, some people actually have to pay money to learn those things. I was lucky. that I just used my head and learned, when I had the opportunity. But it is funny though, on the West Coast, most maintenance supervisors do not know a thing about air conditioning. They don't have to. Most people on the West Coast don't have air conditioning, or if they do, they're window air conditioners, which you don't fix those, you replace them. And so, but when you get into the Midwest and you get into like, Arizona, where you get into Nevada, all that kind of, any place back east, um, maintenance supervisors have to have been certified in air conditioning, HVAC stuff. Now I had to have training with furnaces of a variety of types, electric, gas, fuel oil, but I never had to learn a thing about AC units because we didn't have any. None of the places I ever worked had any. They weren't necessary. It's funny back there. What you do is you open up your house, your windows. You have screens and stuff. You open up your windows at night, and at night it gets down to the 50s, pretty much everywhere. On the western coast. Like every from about an hour, 2 hours from the coast, kind of thing. And then during the daytime, you close the window. In the morning, you close the windows and you pull the shades, and to keep the sun out, and things stay cool. When you're at work or whatever, and you come home, it's 70 degrees inside, and that's that. You enjoy the evening, open up your windows, call it good. But yeah, so that's what I'm writing. I'm writing all that stuff out so that I can start putting that up there as a product that I can really sell. As it is, I've been still creating this business. I haven't been out in the field yet with it. I've done this exact thing in my first iteration of a business a long time in the 90s and early 2000s, and it was doing well. But the problem was I didn't know anything about business, and I was a great tech. My dad did that same thing. He was a great tech, tried to go into business for himself at one time, and realized that he was completely out of his element when it came to the books, when it came to a whole bunch of business things. We used to tease my dad that he was a great businessman if buying high and selling low were the way to go. Um, and it was always a big joke, but at the same time, it was a very serious thing because he knew exactly what the issue was. And that's what separates a lot of small businesses. You have a lot of small businesses that are run by people that have been in that technical field for a long time, and they're excellent at it. But then they're running themselves ragged because they're trying to do something they've never done before, and which is the books and all kind. The books are the scariest words that any small business person says unless they know what the fuck they're doing, or unless they have help. Like back in the day, a lot of small businesses, the books were done by the wife, who could learn that stuff easy as pie, because they weren't a tech. Or you'd have businesses that were run by the person that had been a tech forever, and then they just struggle. They work 16 hours a day between doing their tech work and then trying to run the business. Or they had a very tiny profit margin, which was not sustainable, by hiring, CPAs and stuff like that to run the books and to advise them about the business. But there's a lot to know. Marketing is a fucking huge factor. The administration of the business itself, managing people, and then training people to be technicians and solving problems and mitigating risk, whether it's through insurance or whether it's just good, smart management. There should be no such thing as a business without insurance, because that's just crazy. But even with all the insurance in the world, in my earlier years, I replaced a roof one time that I basically made $150 on, and it was a big job, for me by myself with the guys that I hired. the guys destroyed so much shit around me, like that were owned by the people that owned the house. And I paid for all that stuff. That between paying their wages and and stuff like that, I ended up making like $150 off that job. So I worked for like 2 weeks for $150 for me, and I was the owner of the business. But that was just because I didn't know shit about business, you know. Um, yeah, that runs people ragged. So there's a book that I could turn people on. You don't have to go through 6 years of college like I did to get a master's degree in business administration. You could just read this book, and if you're smart about it and pay attention to it, and if you have to, read it 4 times. It's called The E-Myth Revisited. Um, I listened to that book cover to cover, because I was driving at the time for work, um, 4 times, 5 times. Because every time I heard it, I did it again and again. Every time I listened to it, I heard new things. Because while you're reading something or while you're listening to something, you're processing information while you're still reading. So you're processing something a page ago or 2 pages ago or a chapter ago while you're still reading, which means you're not 100% absorbing that stuff. So my trick has always been to read stuff over and over and over again, and so that I can get all the information. By the time I got to the 4th time and done with that, I had a lot of new information that I didn't have after the first time. The 5th time I read it, and some of it I read because I ordered the book too, and then some of it I listened to, depending if I was at home or if I was driving. And that's how I did know if there was a difference for me between listening to it or reading it. And there was no difference in my absorption rate between listening to it or reading it. I absorbed the same amount each time. Each way, I should say. But by the 5th time I went through it, I remembered each and everything that was talked about, and something even they might have interested me, but they weren't new to me, like a subject that I'd now heard 5 times that was highly interesting to me, but wasn't new to me. Once I knew, that's how I knew I did it enough times. It was 5 times. I said 4 times at first because I remember the 4th time, and I remembered how extra interesting it was to me, just like the first, second, and 3rd times, because I was learning new stuff. I was hearing stuff that I hadn't heard before, and with that, you're going, "How did I not hear that before?" But by the 4th time, you're already like, "Well, I know why I didn't hear it the first time or the first 3 times, because I was processing." But anyway, the E-Myth Revisited. And it stands for, what do you think it stands for? In that book, E. The E-Myth Revisited. It's a big deal. I figured it out the first time I was listening to the book, but it wasn't what I thought it was when I started the book at all. I thought the E was from something else, the first initial of something else. But, and as I was listening to that, I was like, God damn it. I was at the tail end of 6 years of college. I started in COVID. Anyway, so yeah, having fun. I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana right now with my wife. She's working for the same people she's been working with for 5 or 6 years, and she was working with the wrong. I can say it all kinds of ways, but with a regional manager that was doing his best to keep her down, so that she would stay where she was, because she was running a big apartment complex that he used to run, and when the company got acquired, when the complex got acquired by the company, they promoted him foolishly, in my opinion, to his position, and he's never ever been capable of doing it. He's been relying on my wife to do her job plus everybody else's job. And I would love to be a fly on the wall at that place now. Not very long. It would be too frustrating. to be honest, but at the same time, it would be kind of poetic justice, something that was very predictable for me for years. And because the new person that he has there is incapable of doing her own job, much less the next job up. And my wife has, 2 master's degrees, and one of them specifically is in efficiency, basically, process improvement. And the college that we went to, it was the only one that it came up with this new master's degree, and it was the only one still that I know to this day that's offering it. So whatever process is that you put in place for whatever, that study, was like a 2-year program that looked and it looked very carefully at how to get people to do buy-in, how to use metrics to test efficiency and test productivity and things like that, and then how to look at improvement, and then how to implement improvement without scaring everybody off, because a huge part of improving situations is to get people, one, to believe in you by not alienating them, and then two, to get buy-in. They have to believe that it's doable and that it's a great idea, and that they can do it. They can be part of it, and that it'll be worth it and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many people that go in like a bull in a china shop. She and I managed at a company one time that there was a training program, and I really liked these guys. We were in Dallas for that. And they addressed, don't go into it like a bull in a china shop and just change everything. Even if everything needs to be changed, don't do that right away, because you're going to freak everybody out and everybody's going to hate your guts. And at best, you're going to have a bunch of people there waiting to be fired, and they're never going to be doing it. And some of them will directly on purpose do sabotage to get you gone, and with that company, that happens a lot, actually. So because there's a lot of people that are hired that aren't qualified to manage there, which is a really weird business model, but they're getting away with it. So that's what matters, I guess. But my wife is ultra qualified for this, and I did property management stuff for far, far, far longer than her. But when she got into it, she basically got out of what she was doing, which was marketing and figuring out. She worked for a company that worked for worked with a chamber of commerce, and she had been an HR person before that, and for years, and had every license you could get except for one, and in HR, and then worked for a company where she was in charge of marketing the local town to companies, or really countries all over the world, but companies all over the world. And one of the things that she accomplished and put under her belt was that she got a German company that built concrete railroad ties to invest in our small town in Iowa, to open a plant making concrete railroad ties. Since then, as I drive around the country, I've been seeing more and more and more and more and more railroad ties that are made out of concrete. I don't know where all they're made for sure, but some of them are made right there. And that place was opened up right on a railroad, so that they could ship that stuff out, And she was the one that marketed them and coaxed them and got them to choose our 30,000 person town to build in. So, and that's what, that's the idea. Well, the idea is to find businesses and industry that will come to your area and open up to basically increase everything for everybody, better jobs, higher paying jobs, and all that kind of stuff. So she's got some stellar capabilities. And she just took to it like a duck in water. And when we were working together, we were co-managers. She handled all and I've told you guys this before, but she handled all the leasing and any kind of rental issues and complaints, all that kind of stuff. I handled all the staff, which we had a really big staff, and all the marketing. And so I did marketing for quite a while before I actually got a bachelor's degree in marketing. Um, but now I decided to make mine pay. I switched. I mean, this is new information for a lot of you. But I switched from a life of having my own business as I was a contractor, from being a lifelong uh, home builder and maintenance worker. Like when I say maintenance, that means electrical, plumbing, carpentry, that kind of stuff, all of it. And to having my own business, my contracting business, not in maintenance necessarily, but um, in building and repair. And then eventually I focused specifically on uh, repair because there was a ton of competition with home builders. And I used to get told by people, if it's not worth $30,000, I don't even want to think about it. So I'm like, well, okay, you guys take that stuff. I don't need that stuff. I'll take the stuff I know. And so I started a company called Quality Home Repair. And I got called out for uh, many, 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 many types of small jobs. I ended up hiring 3 crews where that they were all getting called out for stuff. And everything was going gangbusters, except there was one problem. I didn't know shit about business. And then the '08 thing happened. Kicked my ass. So I was biting off a lot, and had it been almost any other time, it would have worked. But I was investing in houses at the time, so I had a plan that I was going to buy 50 houses um, that I was gonna with no money down, other than what I did to fix them over time, and that I would pay the mortgage on each of the houses from the renting of the houses. So I knew a lot about maintenance and stuff already, and so not only could I maintain the houses. Most of the houses that I got were project houses where that people had a project and then they just lost their patience with it, or who knows what, they got too old, and that happens a lot. And they're willing to let it go for next to nothing as long as they get out from underneath it, and that happens a lot too. So I started searching for really motivated sellers, people that would advertise with certain words. I mean, they were going to Craigslist, they were going to the want ads, like in the newspaper kind of thing, for sale kind of stuff. Um, People that were pretty uneducated, and so they didn't know how to advertise. Even they didn't know how to market their homes. They weren't willing to go with or some of them couldn't go with a realtor because the realtor wanted a pretty good size amount of money to sell a house or whatever. And the realtors have demands like that you have to fix certain things before the house can sell. And these people were done with that. And so I took my background and started doing that. I had 25 houses of my 50. And the whole point of this whole plan was I was following a program by a guy named Carlton Sheets. Is once I had you vet each one of the houses, you inspect them, they have to meet a whole bunch of different qualifications. Obviously price, the seller and how willing they are to work with you. Um, some of them even want to do a contract, which is great, which is, you go through the bank or anything like that. But the idea is there has to be positive cash flow, meaning that you're getting more from the rental of the house than you're paying for the mortgage of the house. And the whole point of that is that one, you're paying down the house. So you're creating equity at some point, right? As long as everything is paid on time and all that kind of stuff, and as long as, and this is where you have to be knowledgeable about property management. Which, as a maintenance supervisor forever, I worked directly with the office a lot, and I had to go through lots and lots of training that the office had to go to also. So I understood contract law. I understood how leasing worked, and all the normal SOPs for property management. Okay. Um, and that was just like the the appliance guys and stuff, I paid close attention to what the manager was doing. I asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of questions of like the assistant manager, because they were learning as they were going to be managers. They were more than happy to share what they were learning, because that's another way of learning it, is to tell somebody that's interested about it. And that person has questions. Well, that was me. And so I constantly was grilling them about what they do, and this is for 20 years. And so when I got into the buying the houses thing and renting the houses thing or whatever, I ended up having um, 25 houses, and it just so happened, and I wasn't remotely done. Obviously, my goal was 50. And the '08 thing hit. And I don't mean '08. It happened before that, actually. The housing started to really have a crash in Eugene, Oregon, where I was at. And yeah, I barely got out of that with the skin of my teeth. I ended up selling all those houses, not through contract, because I didn't want there to be a never ending thing for me, on that. I needed to be out from underneath them all, because shit was going sideways bad. And so I basically sold those houses for what I had into them, and that was that. Um, and I'm really glad, because when I got out from underneath them, shit got a lot worse. So, um, but the whole point was you get 50 houses. Some of them are keepers, some of them are sellers. Okay, and that's how you define them, basically depending on what they needed, right? Um, so the idea is to get 50 houses, put money into them as you go. Each house has to rent and have an income. So you have to be really aggressive with marketing and stuff like that to make sure that they stay rented. You also have to have a really, really, really good sense of management, in that you can't let anybody destroy a house. You have to do inspections on a pretty often basis. Some people do, like apartment complexes, do yearly inspections. Some of them even do once every 6 months inspections. And I did quarterly inspections. So the idea is, if you go into a house and it's getting wrecked, no problem. Immediately, you do an assessment of the house during an inspection. Right then, when you're doing the inspection, you're taking everything down. You're doing pictures. You're writing it all down and stuff like that, and you bill them for each and every single thing. Like if there's a door that's got a hole punched in it, it's no problem. You repair the door and you bill them for that. If they don't pay the bill, get the fuck out, while it's still a small problem, right? If the carpet's destroyed, that's no problem. Bill them for that right then and there. Get the carpet replaced. And if they can't pay the bill, get the fuck out. All that kind of stuff. So nothing, because I've working for other people, I've seen plenty of times where you go into an apartment and the apartment's destroyed, $50,000 of damage. There is absolutely no way you will ever collect that from somebody. You sell that to, or you hire a collection company, you'll never ever see that. That person that does that kind of damage to a place they live doesn't care about that. They're going to be okay with having a bad credit rating their entire life. You can't send them to prison for something like that. So they're just going to have a bad credit rating their whole life, but that doesn't help you as the property owner. So I did inspections every quarter, and and good property owner or renters or whatever like that would have incentives to stay good property renters, and they would get discounts, and they would get like a new water heater or something like that. Stuff that's going to pay me anyway, because water heaters last for 10 years now. You always put a date on the water heater, and in 10 years that gets replaced. But the good news for an owner is that it's a capital expense, meaning that you can predict when you have to replace that water heater. And you can plan for it. Each house or each apartment or whatever has an account, and the account gets a certain amount of money going into it. It's like a savings account that never stops. And you have lots of plans for way down the road, whether it's a new roof, new water heater, new appliances, or a whole new update of the entire apartment. But that account, it's not a real account. It's like on a spreadsheet. Okay, each apartment has its dates and it has its time scheduled, preventative maintenance and scheduled things where that you know that this expense is going to go into that place. When that time comes, you've got the money because it's something that's been saved, and it's been saved in a way that it's been paying you a little interest even. So it pays for the maintenance of the account, okay, and of the paperwork. So then slowly but surely, the right apartments or right building, right houses or whatever are getting these improvements and they're paying for themselves. Okay. So the trick is you're not paying out any money out of your pocket. Okay. Now there are properties that are worth way more than you're paying for them, which is great, or there's certain things you can do to them to suddenly make them way worth more. I mean, I took several houses and the very first thing I did was I completely redid the yard, where you had houses that were just blocking the entire front of the house. And I'm like, when this house was built, it was not supposed to look like that. And so then I removed this tree, or I trimmed this tree, or I trimmed those bushes. I would literally fix the grass, fix the sidewalks, and stuff, because that stuff's all really cheap to do. But at the same time, when it's all about people's feelings when they're going to look at something to see if they're going to rent it. If they look at it and they're like, oh, God, that's terrible. You're going, good luck on that. When they go by and they go, whoa, that looks like that's like from 1950, but it's perfect. Suddenly you've got an extra several $100s on that thing. And I don't care if people can't afford it. There's a bunch of other people that can, and that's who you market to, the people that can afford your stuff. It's business. And, so it was going the right direction. So the idea is that at a certain point, you have your 50 houses. And at a certain point, while you're doing that, when you get to a certain level of equity in some of the houses, the ones that you had planned on, you sell half of them. And you take the money, you don't go party with it, you sell half of them, and you take the money you've gotten out of those houses. Now, obviously, you're not going to get to keep all that money, okay? Some of it's just equity. And then the rest of it's buying it from the bank, kind of a thing. You take that equity and you put it into the other houses to buy the equity, in those houses, or to make important improvements that will really bump their value, their rental value, and stuff like that. But for the most part, the improvements that will really bump the value are aesthetic. That's stuff that I can do, that I was doing constantly, or that I could hire people to do, and not people that are necessarily qualified, but people that can take direction and they're willing to. Anyway, I was doing that. And the whole goal is to end up with 25 houses that are really, really, really paid down and that don't need a ton of stuff here soon, like roofs and all that kind of crap. Because in that kind of business, where you make your money is your ability and experience to do the things yourself rather than hire them done. Because the companies that are doing that work, at least half of the cost is their profit. And so instead, you can keep that profit in your pocket. And at some point, when the equity is you're getting enough equity out of the property because the mortgages are paid down enough, and the big expenditures are well enough covered where that you can start hiring them done, and no fuss, no muss, right? Eventually, that's a retirement thing, where that you're making passive income all the time, whether you're there or not. Eventually, you hire somebody to do what you're doing, a property management company, or even just hire somebody and train them to do the property management you're already doing. So they're working for your company. They're just taking your spot, out of the work. And so that you could literally retire. You always want to be plugged in for your good advice, for somebody. But you have somebody that... What, kid? She's looking at me funny. What did I do? Did you just wake up out of a bad dream or something? Okay. But then you have a retirement. So the whole plan was, 50 houses, do all that, and then pay down 25 houses, and eventually get to where that I had, to work my way down to how many ever houses I thought I would need for an income, where there's I own the whole houses outright, where all the rent that comes from them after expenses and after even paying somebody to manage them where that the income that I'm getting out of them is more than I need. Okay. And that was the plan. And it was a plan that I bought the program, to learn that from Carlton Sheets, and I studied it day and night along with my work that I was doing. And then I pulled the trigger and started working on it. And it was, sure enough, it was working, But then the housing bubble burst, and that shit hadn't happened like that since 1939. So 1929, 1939. I can't remember. 29, I think. Yeah. So thanks, George Bush Jr. But anyway, they really fucked me up. I had stuff worked out so that it would be, and that kind of shit has happened to me over and over again in my life. I knew a guy when we worked at Holiday. It was the retirement place. He had made plans, made investments, long-term investments, and and it was all in investments in that was still being worked like a 401k type thing. Right before that, the '08 thing hit. And right before he was going to retire, he had tons of money in the bank and over $1 million, way over. And overnight, it was gone. And he'd been working his whole life for that. And he was an old man by this time. Too late to start over. He said he almost killed himself. You know what I mean? By the time I met him, he was pretty messed up from age, and and you could tell he was a way partier back in the day. I mean, that guy probably did so much coke in the 80s. But yeah, it went away overnight, and he lived out his days he had enough money left so that he could live out his days in a really nice retirement community. But that's what happened. He had it all set up to where he was going to be buying a bus, one of the really $2 million RV type things, and traveling the country and doing his favorite stuff. And he said overnight it was gone because of George Bush Sr. and his stupid fucking economical plans. Just like the joker we've got now. This one is way worse, though. I mean, I had to pause to think about that for a second. George Bush Jr., George W. Bush, the stuff he did was so catastrophic, and wrecked so many people's lives. I mean, when I say wrecked, they had shit planned out to where that they were gonna, live their golden years, in style, all that stuff, and they wound up being Walmart greeters for the rest of their life and shit. People that had great big jobs, like investors and shit like that. I'm not fucking with you. I talked to many people that wound up with part-time jobs as Walmart greeters because they couldn't do anything else. And in pain, like really bad arthritis, not good insurance, even though, they had, Social Security, which is, Medicaid, which is not good. Never was good. Now it's terrible. Thank you fucking very much, Trump. But there's some weird times ahead, man. But for me, it's not going to be any big deal. I've been through it over and over and over again. It's just going to be a Wednesday. I feel bad for a lot of people that have never gone through those Wednesdays, though. They won't know what to do. Well, anyway, no, none of that. I'm going to get back to work. And this video has been almost 2 freaking hours. I don't know how you guys watch this, but feel free to, I guess, to watch it over and over and over again if you want, for, if you have to go to sleep, or if you want to show these to your kids as, cautionary tales. That's what I would say. All right. Anyway, one day I'll make an 8-hour one out, or so. I don't know. Maybe I won't. We'll see you later. Take it easy. Be cool.